and thank you for joining me on today's lesson. Of course, we are doing the lesson, the continuance of the book of 1 Samuel, and we are on lesson 2 today. Lesson 2, we're going to be discussing Eli and his sons. So, hello, I am your instructor, Saint Octavia, and today we're going to be continuing our lesson from the course on First Samuel. Today we're going to be doing lesson 2 titled Eli and his sons. Okay, so we're going to delve right in there. Who was Eli and what was his role in Israel? Well, Eli was a priest and judge in Israel. In the biblical book of First Samuel, Eli was a significant figure in the history of Israel. He served as a high priest, he served as a priest and judge during the traditional period for the Israelites. The transitional period for the Israelites, between the time of the judges and the establishment of the monarchy. So, Eli was the high priest in the tabernacle of Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. He belonged to the priestly lineage of Aaron and served as a spiritual leader for the people of Israel. As a judge, he was responsible for settling disputes and maintaining order among the Israelites. So, however, Eli's story is also marked by some tragic events and personal failures. So let's get into that. One of the notable episodes involving Eli is the story of Anna, a barren woman who fervently prayed for a child. Eli initially misunderstood Hannah's deep prayer and accused her of being drunk. When he realized her sincerity, he blessed her. And Hannah eventually became the mother of Samuel, a prominent prophet and judge. Eli's most significant challenge came through his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, who served as priests under him. Unfortunately, his sons were corrupt and engaged in immoral behavior, including embezzlement and taking advantage of their position for personal gain. Despite knowing about their wrongdoings, Eli failed to discipline them effectively, which brought disgrace upon the priesthood in the tabernacle. In a pivotal event, the Philistines waged war against the Israelites, and the Ark of the Covenant was taken from the tabernacle by the Israelites in a misguided attempt to win the battle. When Eli received news of the capture of the ark and the death of his sons, he fell backward from his seat, broke his neck, and died. Eli's role in First Samuel highlights both his dedication to serving as a priest and judge, as well as his shortcomings as a father and leader. Despite his failings, his story serves as a reminder of the importance of integrity, discipline, and accountability in leadership, and the consequences that can arise from neglecting these principles. Eli served as the high priest in the tabernacle at Shiloh. The tabernacle was a portable sanctuary that housed the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred symbol of God's presence among the Israelites. As the high priest, Eli was responsible for overseeing the religious rituals, sacrifices, and ceremonies that took place in the tabernacle. Eli's role included conducting the various priestly duties, such as offering sacrifices, interceding on behalf of the people, and performing the rituals prescribed by the Mosaic law. He was responsible for maintaining the sanctity of the tabernacle and ensuring that the worship of God was carried out in accordance with the divine commandments. So, one of the key responsibilities of the high priest was to offer the annual sacrifice on the Day of Atonement, which was a significant event in the religious calendar. This ritual involved entering the most holy place where the Ark of the Covenant was kept and making atonement for the sins of the people. Eli's role in the tabernacle at Shiloh extended beyond the religious duties. As a judge and spiritual leader, he also played a crucial role in settling disputes and maintaining order among the Israelites. People would come to him seeking guidance in their resolution for their conflicts. And he would provide counsel and make judgments based on the laws and principles of God. However, as mentioned earlier, Eli's sons Hophni and Phinehas, who served as priests under him, were corrupt and brought disgrace to the tabernacle. Despite his knowledge of their wrongdoing, Eli failed to take decisive action to discipline them, which ultimately resulted in the loss of the ark in the covenant and the downfall of his priesthood. Eli's role in the tabernacle at Shiloh exemplifies the importance of faithful and righteous leadership in the worship and administration of God's sanctuary. While he had good intentions, his failure to address the misconduct of his sons highlights the need for accountability and the detrimental consequences of negligence in leadership. So, what were the sins committed by Eli's sons? Let's delve into that a little deeper. Hophni and Phinehas and Hophni, excuse me, and Phinehas were corrupt priests who stole from the offerings and engaged in sexual immorality. 1 Samuel. Eli's sons committed several sins that brought disgrace to the tabernacle and provoked the judgment of God. Here are some of the sins that they were guilty of: desecration of the offerings. They would take the portions of the sacrifices that were meant for God and consume them for themselves. They would even demand raw meat from the people before it was cooked, which was against the proper procedures for offering sacrifices. They engaged in sexual immorality. They engaged in sexual misconduct with the women who served at the entrance of the tabernacle. They took advantage of their position as priests and committed acts of sexual immorality, showing a complete disregard for God's commandments and the sanctity of the tabernacle. They also abused their power and their authority as priests by mistreating the people who came to worship at the tabernacle. They would use their position to extort offerings from the people and show favoritism towards certain individuals, leading to a sense of injustice and corruption. They had a lack of reverence for the Lord. Despite being raised in the sanctuary and having knowledge of God's laws, Hophni and Phinehas did not show proper reverence for the Lord. They treated the sacred objects, such as the Ark of the Covenant, with disrespect and failed to honor the holiness of the tabernacle. These sins committed by Eli's sons were not only a violation of their priestly responsibilities, but also a direct defiance of God's commandments. Their actions brought great shame upon the tabernacle and provoked the anger of God, leading to severe consequences for both themselves and the entire nation of Israel. Hophni and Phinehas showed a lack of reverence for the Lord and the sanctity of the tabernacle in several ways. So, like I said prior, they misused the offerings. They were responsible for handling the offerings brought by the people. However, they would take the portions of sacrifices for themselves before they offered to God. This demonstrated a lack of respect for the sacredness of the offerings and the disregard for the commandments regarding the handling of sacrifices. They had a disrespect for these sacred objects. They showed a lack of reverence for the sacred objects of the tabernacle, including the Ark of the Covenant. They treated these objects with disrespect and failed to honor the significance and holiness. This demonstrated a disregard for the presence of God in the tabernacle and a lack of understanding of the sanctity of these objects. Again, they took part in sexual immorality within the tabernacle. They engaged in sexual misconduct with the women who served at the entrance of the tabernacle. This not only violated God's commandments regarding sexual purity, but also showed a complete lack of respect for the sanctity of the tabernacle as a holy place of worship. They abused their power and mistreated the people. The sons of Eli used their position as priests to mistreat the people who came to worship at the tabernacle. They would demand offerings from the people, even going as far as taking them forcibly, and showed favoritism towards certain individuals. This abuse of power demonstrated a complete lack of reverence for God and a disregard for the well being of the people they were meant to serve. Overall, Eli's sons displayed a lack of reverence for the Lord and the sanctity of the tabernacle through their actions of misusing the offerings, disrespecting sacred objects, engaging in sexual immorality, and abusing their power as priests. These actions brought great dishonor to the tabernacle and provoked the judgment of God. So, what was the consequences of their sins? Well, the Lord pronounced judgment on Eli's house, declaring that his descendants would not live to old age. The consequences of his son's actions were severe and had far reaching implications. For one, death in battle. God sent a prophet to Eli, the father of Hophni and Phinehas, to deliver a message of judgment. The prophet warned that both Hophni and Phinehas would die on the same day. This prophecy was fulfilled when the Israelites went into battle against the Philistines. His sons, along with many other Israelites, were killed in the battle, bringing an end to their lives. The loss of the Ark of the Covenant. During the battle against the Philistines, the Israelites brought the Ark of the Covenant with them, hoping that it would give them victory. However, their hope was in vain. Because of the sins of his sons, the Philistines defeated the Israelites and captured the ark, taking it away from the tabernacle. This was a significant loss for Israel and a direct consequence of the actions of Eli's sons. Judgment on the house of Eli. The consequences of what his sons had done extended beyond their own deaths. God pronounced judgment on the house of Eli. The high priest and father, the prophet, declared that the priesthood would be taken away from the descendants of Eli, and his family would no longer serve as priests before God. This judgment was fulfilled when Solomon became king and appointed Zadok as the high priest, bypassing the descendants of Eli. There was a loss of God's favor and presence. The actions of his sons caused a loss of God's favor and presence in the tabernacle. The departure of the Ark of the Covenant symbolized the departure of God's presence in the midst of Israel. The tabernacle lost its significance as the central place of worship, and the people of Israel suffered spiritual consequences due to the absence of God's guidance and protection. The consequences of Eli's sons' actions were severe, resulting in their own deaths, the loss of the Ark of the Covenant, the judgment of the house of Eli, and the departure of God's favor and presence from the tabernacle. These consequences serve as a lesson about the importance of reverence and obedience to God's commands. The consequences of Hophni and Phinehas' actions in battle were significant and had a direct impact on the outcome. The defeat and loss of life, along with many other Israelites, they were killed in battle. This loss of life was a direct consequence of their disobedience and sinful behavior. The Israelites' defeat in the battle can be attributed, at least in part, to the absence of God's favor and protection due to the actions of Eli's sons. The capture of the Ark of the Covenant. The Israelites brought the Ark of the Covenant with them to battle, hoping that it would give them victory. However, their reliance on the Ark as a mere object of power, rather than seeking God's guidance and obedience to his commands, proved futile. The Philistines defeated the Israelites and captured the ark, taking it away from the tabernacle. This was a significant loss for Israel and a direct consequence of the actions of Eli's sons. They had a symbolic loss of God's presence. The departure of the Ark of the Covenant from the tabernacle symbolized the departure of God's presence from the midst of Israel. The Ark represented God's presence and his covenant relationship with his people. Its capture by the Philistines was a profound consequence of Hophni and Phinehas' actions, as it signaled in the loss of God's favor and protection in battle. They had spiritual and moral decline. The actions of Eli's sons, which included taking for themselves the best portions of the sacrifices and committing sexual immorality with the women who served at the entrance of the tabernacle, contributed to a spiritual and moral decline among the people of Israel. Their disobedience and disregard for God's commands set a negative example for the entire nation, leading to a weakening of their faith and a departure from God's ways. The consequences of Hophni and Phinehas' action in battle were defeat, loss of life, capture of the Ark of the Covenant, symbolic loss of God's presence, and a decline in the spiritual and moral state of Israel. These consequences serve as a reminder of the importance of the obedience and reverence towards God, and the destructive consequences that can result from disobedience and sinful behavior. So, how did Eli respond when he heard the prophecy against his family? Well, Eli accepted the judgment and said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes." When Eli heard the prophecy against his family, he responded with resignation and acceptance rather than taking decisive action to prevent or address the issues within his family. The prophecy came from a man of God who delivered a message to Eli revealing the consequences that would befall his family because of the sins committed by his sons. Eli's response can be seen in 1 Samuel 3:18, where he says to Samuel, the young prophet who delivered the message, "He is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes." This statement indicates that Eli recognized the authority and sovereignty of God and acknowledged that God had the right to bring judgment upon his family. However, despite his resignation to the prophecy, Eli failed to take effective action to address the sins of his sons. He did not exercise the necessary discipline and correction that was expected of him as their father and as the high priest. Eli's lack of intervention and accountability allowed the sinful behavior of his sons to continue, ultimately leading to the downfall of his family and the decline of the spiritual and moral state of Israel. Eli's response, although acknowledging God's authority, can be seen as a passive acceptance rather than an active effort to rectify the situation. His failure to take decisive action reflects a weakness in leadership and a lack of responsibility in addressing the sins within his own household. So, the outcome of Eli's failure to address the sins of his sons were severe and tragic. As prophesied, judgment befell Eli's family, and the consequences were devastating. Firstly, both Eli's sons were killed in a battle against the Philistines. Of course, this occurred during the time when the Israelites were engaged in a conflict with their enemies. Hophni and Phinehas, who were priests serving at the tabernacle, they took the Ark of the Covenant into battle as a superstitious attempt to ensure their victory. However, their actions were disrespectful and disobedient to God's commands. Regarding the ark, as a result, the Philistines defeated the Israelites, captured the ark, and killed Eli's sons in battles. Upon receiving this news of their death, the shock and grief overwhelmed Eli, causing him to fall backward off his seat and break his neck. Eli, who was already old and blind, died on the same day as his sons. Additionally, the prophecy against Eli's family came to pass in the following generations. The line of Eli's descendants was cut off from serving as priests in the tabernacle. The priesthood was transferred to the line of Phinehas, a faithful priest who had served alongside Eli's sons. The failure to address the sins of his sons not only led to their own demise, but also resulted in the loss of the priesthood within Eli's family. The consequences of Eli's inaction and lack of discipline reverberated through generations, impacting the spiritual and religious leadership of Israel. Thus, the outcome of Eli's failure to address the sins of his sons was the loss of their lives, Eli's own death, and the removal of his family from the priesthood, all of which had significant consequences for the nation of Israel. The long-term effects of Eli's failure to address the sins of his sons were significant and far-reaching. Here are some long-term effects. As mentioned earlier, the loss of priesthood. The line of Eli's descendants was cut off from serving as priests in the tabernacle. The priesthood was transferred to the line of Phinehas, a faithful priest who had served alongside Eli's sons. This loss of the priesthood within Eli's family had a lasting impact on the religious leadership in Israel. They had a weakening of spiritual authority. Eli's failure to discipline his sons and address their sinful behavior weakened the authority and credibility of the priesthood. The people of Israel witnessed the corruption and disobedience of the priests, which eroded their trust in the religious leaders in the system of worship. They had a deterioration of moral standards. The lack of discipline and accountability for his sons set a dangerous precedent for future generations. The failure to address their sins allowed for a culture of corruption and immorality to develop within the priesthood and potentially among the people as well. This deterioration of moral standards had long term consequences for the spiritual and moral fabric of the nation. They had a loss of divine protection. Eli's failure to address the sins of his sons also had implications for the nation's relationship with God. The Ark of the Covenant, which symbolized God's presence and protection, was captured by the Philistines due to Hophni and Phinehas's disobedience. This loss represented a significant blow to Israel's sense of divine protection and favor. 5. Prophecy fulfilled. The consequences of Eli's inaction fulfilled the prophecy spoken against his family. The prophecy stated that Eli's descendants would not live to old age and that his family's priestly line would be cut off. This prophecy came to pass with the death of Eli and his sons and the subsequent loss of the priesthood within the Eli's family. In summary, the long-term effects of Eli's failure to address the sins of his sons included the loss of the priesthood within his family, the weakening of spiritual authority, the deterioration of moral standards, the loss of divine protection, and the fulfillment of the prophecy against his family. These effects had a lasting impact on the religious and moral landscape of Israel. Thank you so much for joining me on Lesson 2, Eli and his sons. I pray that this lesson has given you some insight on the book of 1 Samuel and that you will continue on with this study with me. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm your instructor, Saint Octavia, and have a blessed day.